All right, let's jump right into this. We're going to unpack the long and frankly very complicated relationship between the United States and Brazil. We'll start with the modern trade war, but you'll see how it has some pretty surprising echoes from the Cold War. It's like there's a playbook of pressure that's just been evolving for the past 60 years.
So our story really kicks off in the middle of 2025, when President Donald Trump came out with this really sharp declaration. He was talking to reporters and, well, he did not mince words. He accused Brazil of charging very, very high tariffs and basically said the U.S. was getting a raw deal.
And, this wasn't just talk. He backed it up with a huge number, 50%. A massive 50% tariff on all Brazilian products set to start on August 1st. This wasn't some warning shot. This was a full-blown economic broadside. As you can imagine, this move set off an immediate and pretty intense trade crisis. We're talking about two of the biggest economies in the Americas, after all. But if you look a little closer, you have to ask, was this really just about trade? What was the full story here?
This is where it gets really fascinating, because we have the official letter sent straight from the White House to Brazil's President Lula da Silva. And it's right here, in black and white, that they lay out their reasons for the tariffs. And let me tell you, it goes way beyond economics.
The letter flat out connects these economic penalties to Brazil's internal politics. It mentions attacks on free elections and censorship orders from Brazil's Supreme Court. But the most direct part, it calls the prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro, who is a political ally of Trump, an international disgrace. So yeah, this is clearly mixing commerce with some heavy-duty political pressure.
This kind of aggressive move, using the huge economic power of the U.S. to try and influence what's happening inside Brazil, it really brings up a crucial question. Is this a totally new 21st century tactic, or does this kind of high-stakes pressure play have deeper historical roots?
To answer that, we've got to turn back the clock. Over 60 years, in fact, to the early 1960s, right at the peak of the Cold War. Now, the world was a very different place, but the power dynamics between the U.S. and Brazil, you're about to see some fascinating parallels.
Back then, the Kennedy administration was deeply suspicious of Brazil's president, João Goulart, who everyone called Django. His connections to leftist labor unions, his independent foreign policy, his whole reform agenda just sparked a lot of fear in Washington. The big worry was that Brazil, the largest country in Latin America, could fall under communist influence.
This timeline really shows how quickly U.S. involvement ramped up. It started with what looked like economic aid programs, but it quickly escalated into covert political action, funding anti-Goulart candidates in the '62 elections, and ultimately supporting the military plotters who would overthrow him.
Now, a key tool for this was the Alliance for Progress. On paper, it was this massive, multi-billion-dollar aid package for development. But in Brazil, the money was strategically funneled away from the federal government and towards opposition governors. The U.S. ambassador at the time actually called their states islands of sanity. So what they were doing was weakening the president while strengthening his rivals.
Okay, so if we put these two moments, the 1960s and the 2020s, side by side, you start to see a clear playbook emerge for how the U.S. influences Brazil. The goals might have some similarities, but the tactics, they've definitely evolved.
And this comparison really gets to the core of what we're explaining here. In the 60s, the pressure was all covert, all cloak and dagger. We're talking secret CIA funding, military plans like Operation Brother Sam, rerouted aid. Today, it's totally overt, and it's economic. You've got massive public tariffs, official letters laying out political demands, and vocal support for allies. The tools have moved from the shadows right into the spotlight.
So let's look at the real-world results. What were the consequences of these two very different approaches to applying pressure? How did these strategies actually play out on the ground in Brazil?
Well, the outcome of the Cold War pressure was decisive, and it was dramatic. On March 31, 1964, the Brazilian military, knowing it had U.S. backing, overthrew the democratically elected government. This installed a military dictatorship that would last for 21 years and aligned Brazil firmly with the U.S. in the Cold War.
Now, in our modern scenario, the battle isn't for military control. It's for market access. The pressure is applied through trade, with that 50% tariff threatening to devastate key parts of the Brazilian economy and create just massive financial uncertainty.
And you have to understand the sheer scale of the economic stakes today. We are talking about billions and billions of dollars in trade. The U.S. is a top market for everything from Brazilian coffee and beef to high-tech goods like aircraft. A 50% tariff threatens to make these products completely uncompetitive overnight. It's wielding economic disruption as a really powerful weapon.
So when we step back and we look at this long history of pressure, what does it all tell us? What does it say about the nature of power, about sovereignty, and about the relationship between these two countries today?
Look, this isn't just a history lesson, not at all. Understanding this pattern of pressure helps us decode today's headlines. That basic conflict between a country's sovereignty and its alignment with a superpower is just as relevant now as it was in 1964. And the evolution of the tactics, from secret ops to trade wars, it shows us how the tools of global power have adapted for a more interconnected world.
And that all leaves us with one final thought to chew on. As we move from the shadows of Cold War conspiracies into the bright, harsh spotlight of the global economy, has the fundamental game of influence and power actually changed? Or are we just watching the same historical playbook being run with a new set of economic rules?